Welcome to Madame Raven's. This way to the library. She's been expecting you.
Two stories from Ken Lewis. Paddy, Puddle Jumper. "Do you think you can come over later and help me with my math homework?" Caitlin asked me as we walked home from school. "Maybe," I answer. "I have to ask my mom first." Caitlin struggled to keep up with the rest of class, so I frequently helped her with her homework and tried to explain things in a way she could understand. Once I overheard her mom telling my mom that the school suggested she be put in one of the special education classes. I was trying to prevent that from happening. "Homework is so boring," a voice called out to us. We both stopped and turned to look at the man that had spoken. He seemed to appear out of nowhere. I could have sworn we were the only ones on the street a second ago. "Wouldn't you rather have a little fun?" he asked with a smile. He was dressed in an expensive-looking suit and was wearing a bowler hat that was slightly askew on his head. What I couldn't understand was why he was standing in the gutter, in the middle of a puddle, instead of on the sidewalk. He was going to ruin his shoes, and they looked just as expensive as his suit. "You're getting your shoes wet," Caitlin pointed to the man's feet. "So I am." He lifted one of his feet and looked down in mock surprise. "That's okay, though, because these are my puddle jumping shoes." He winked at us and then jumped a couple inches off the ground and splashed back down in the puddle he was standing in. Caitlin laughed. "Puddle jumping is quite fun. You should give it a try." "We have to go." I tried to get Caitlin to start walking again. "Already?" the man whined. "You haven't jumped in any puddles yet, and you have those wonderful puddle-jumping shoes on." He pointed at the rain boots we were wearing. "Can't we just jump in a couple?" She looked around at all of the puddles that had been left behind by the recent thunderstorm, then over at me. I could tell she really liked the idea of splashing through puddles. "Just a couple," the man added his plea to Caitlin's. Before I could answer, she jumped into the air and landed in the nearest puddle and started laughing. "Bravo!" the man clapped. "That was truly spectacular jump." "Come on, Sarah," Caitlin called out to me as she jumped to the side and into another puddle. "I have an idea." The man thrust his finger into the air. "Why don't we play a game?" "We don't know you." I narrowed my eyes at him. "Why should we play a game with you?" I knew he was up to something, but I couldn't tell what. I wanted to leave, but I wasn't going to go without Caitlin. "I seem to have forgotten my manners," he apologized. "I'm Paddy Puddle Jumper." After he said his name, he lifted his hat into the air with his left hand and swept his right arm across his stomach and bowed theatrically. "That's a funny name," Caitlin said. "That's because I like to have fun." Paddy jumped up into the air, and instead of splashing back down like I expected, he sank quickly into the puddle until he was firmly submerged. Then he vanished. I walked over and stared at the water, wondering how he was able to disappear like that. It had to be some sort of a trick. The puddle looked like an ordinary puddle. It couldn't have been more than a couple inches deep. I know because I could see the bottom of it. "Is she always this boring?" I whirled around when I heard Paddy's voice behind me. He was standing in a different puddle, leaning towards Caitlin as he asked his question. He was completely dry except for his shoes, which were partially submerged in the water. Caitlin giggled when he reappeared. How did you do that? I needed to know. If you want to know, you have to play the game. He winked at me. I'll play, Caitlin called out. Fabulous, Paddy said, and turned his attention back to her. The rules of the game are simple. All you have to do is follow me through the puddles. That game is called Follow the Leader, she told him in a matter-of-fact tone. So it is, he agreed with a smile. Do you like playing Follow the Leader? She nodded. Do you like splashing in puddles? She nodded again. Excellent! He clapped his hands together. Then you are going to love this game. I think we should go, Kate. I walked over and grabbed her hand and tried to tug her along, but she pulled away from me and stood her ground. I want to play the game. I don't think that's a good idea. It's just jumping in puddles, right, Paddy? That's correct, he agreed, the smile never leaving his face. We can jump through puddles all the way home if you like, just not with him. I kept my voice low as I spoke. Maybe Sarah is right, Paddy sounded sad. Maybe you should head on home. I can play the game by myself. It won't be as much fun, but I'm used to it. It's hard finding people who want to jump through puddles. He turned around as if he was going to leave. If there was one thing I was certain of, it was that Paddy wasn't normal. I wasn't even sure he was human. While Caitlin was fixated on his sad face and buying into his sympathy act, I was looking at his feet. When he turned around to leave, his legs didn't move. His whole body sort of just rotated on the spot. Don't go, Caitlin called out. I'll play the game with you. Just ignore Sarah. She looked over at me, an annoyed look on her face. Are you sure? He rotated back around. I'm positive. Jumping through puddles is much more fun with a friend. His smile was back. Let's begin before it starts raining again. He looked at the dark clouds in the sky. I walked back over to the sidewalk and stood there with my arms folded over my chest. I considered running and getting an adult, but the nearest house was too far away. By the time I got there and returned, something might have happened to Caitlin. All you have to do is follow me and jump in the puddles that I jump in. He jumped into the air and dropped into the puddle he was standing in and disappeared like he did earlier. I was able to see all of the puddles from where I stood on the sidewalk. I saw Paddy return in a different puddle, a few feet away from the one he disappeared in. When he reappeared, it was like he was on an elevator that was lifting him out of the ground. Even more amazing was the fact that he was completely dry. Caitlin didn't seem concerned by Paddy or his strange ability. After he moved on to the next puddle, she happily jumped into the one it just left. They continued like that, puddle after puddle, for several minutes. I began to think maybe it was just a game. Last one, Paddy called out. Then I have to go. When I think back on that moment, I tell myself I wasn't paying attention, that I was looking the other way. But the truth is that I didn't recognize the danger until it was too late. A lot of people who tell stories like this say that time seems to stand still, or everything was moving in slow motion. That isn't how I remember it. Time seemed to speed up while I was stood there, unable to save my friend. Paddy jumped to the next puddle. A second later, Caitlin jumped after him. No! I yelled out as I ran to stop her, but wasn't quick enough, and I was too far away to grab her. I watched in horror as she landed in the middle of the open manhole and disappeared. I got down on my hands and knees and thrust my arm into the opening, all the way up to my shoulder. I frantically felt around for her, but all I felt was the rush of water pulling my arm. I stood up and turned to Paddy. "Bring her back!" I yelled at him. "I can't." His voice was somber, and he was no longer smiling. "Bring her back!" I yelled again and again. "Bring her back!" I repeated with a sob. He removed his hat and held it to his chest. "I am truly sorry for your loss," he said as he descended into the puddle. I balled my fist and ran at him. I was going to make him bring her back, but he was gone before I reached the puddle. The only proof that he was ever there was a black bowler hat floating on the surface of the water. I grabbed the hat and ran home. I slammed the door and hysterically tried to explain to my mother what happened. I don't remember what I said, but it was enough to get her to pick up the phone and start dialing the police. As she waited for the operator to come on the line, she glanced over and saw the hat in my hand. "Where did you get that hat?" She pointed at it and quickly hung up the phone. "It's Paddy's," I said. When I said his name, all of the color drained from her face. "Give it to me and go to your room." She reached out her hand. I walked over and handed her the hat and started to walk down the hall to my bedroom. I could feel her eyes on the back of my head until I was out of sight. I stopped walking when I heard her pick up the phone again. "He's back," I heard her say to whomever she called. She sounded scared. I didn't stick around and listen to the rest of the conversation. I just went to my room and cried myself to sleep. I think my cat ate a fairy. "What do you have in your mouth, Cleo?" I knew she wasn't going to respond. She was only a cat. I was just surprised to see legs of some unfortunate creature dangling from her jaws. I bent down to get a closer look, but she growled at me and ran off before I could see what it was. She knew she wasn't supposed to have it. Otherwise, she wouldn't have run away. Last time she brought a dead thing into the house, I took it away. She wasn't going to let me do that again. "That better not be another mouse," I called out as I followed her. I knew exactly where she was going. The same place she always went when she wanted to hide. Under my bed. "I know you're under there." I lifted the edge of the comforter and began to move boxes out of the way. "Oh, that's so gross, Cleo." I could hear the crunching of little bones as she devoured her catch. By the time I got everything out of my way, I could see her. She was licking her lips. I shook my head. She meowed and crawled out from under the bed. She started to rub up against my legs. That was her way of asking for forgiveness. "How many times have I told you not to bring those things into the house?" I scolded her like a child. "I'm not going to let you outside anymore if you don't stop." She meowed in response and then jumped up on the bed. "Oh, you are a nasty cat." I pointed my finger at her. I left the room and went about my day, trying to forget that my cat had eaten something under my bed again. She begged to go back outside several times that afternoon, but I ignored her. The forest creatures deserved a break from her murder spree. Later that night, while I was getting ready to sleep, I heard Cleo out in the hall hacking and gagging. Nothing gets you out of bed faster than the sound of an animal about to puke. I ran out into the hall, hoping to catch her before she vomited all over the carpet. I didn't make it in time. I got to her right as the hairball slid out of her mouth. It was a nasty one. It was huge and covered in thick ropes of mucus and partially digested food. "Why do you always do that on the carpet?" She ran off at the sound of my voice. I walked into the bathroom, grabbed a wad of toilet paper, and used it to pick up the hairball. I could feel the bile rising in the back of my throat as my hand touched the soft, squishy mass through the paper. What made it worse was how warm it felt. Before I tossed it in the toilet, I decided to look at it. I couldn't help it. I know how gross they are, but I've always felt compelled to look at them. I didn't believe what I was seeing. The hairball seemed to sparkle in the light like it was coated with glitter. I had no idea how much Cleo could have eaten that much glitter without me knowing it. The stuff would have been all over her face. The presence of glitter, or whatever it was, got me curious. So I used a cotton swab to pull the hairball apart. What I found in the middle was even weirder. Tangled up in all of that hair were pieces of green fabric and a little purple shoe. I thought back to the moment I saw the little legs dangling out of Cleo's mouth and tried to recall if I'd seen a shoe. Was it possible that she'd eaten some kid's toy? I've caught her eating a few of her cat toys in the past, but this was a new level of weirdness, even for her. If it was a toy, maybe there were still pieces of it under the bed. I decided to check. I cleared everything out from underneath the bed and shined the light from my phone at the area where Cleo was hiding. I wasn't surprised to see the second shoe and a few more pieces of fabric, but I was surprised when the light illuminated a large segmented wing. I pulled everything out and laid the items on the bed. I picked up the wing and rolled the tip of it between my fingers. It didn't feel plastic like I thought it would. It was a real wing. If I had to guess, I'd say it once belonged to a dragonfly or maybe a cicada. I put the items on the nightstand next to the shoe from the hairball. Then I went to bed. It was getting late and I had to work in the morning. The mystery of what my cat had eaten could wait until tomorrow. Cleo woke me up bright and early like she always did. She jumped up onto the bed, walked up my legs, and then started to rub her head against my hand. She did that until I woke up and started petting her. I stroked her fur for a few minutes before I rolled over onto my back and turned on the lamp. What the Oh! I quickly sat up and moved away from the cat. That's not Cleo, I thought. At least it didn't look like her. It didn't look like any cat I'd ever seen. Cleo was a calico cat. She had large patches of white, black, and orange fur. The cat on my bed was purple. Not solid purple, but 3 different shades of purple. Cleo? I asked, not wanting to believe what I was seeing. The cat was wearing Cleo's collar, and the patterns on her fur were the same, just different shades of purple. When I said her name, she meowed and walked over to me and began to nuzzle my hand with her head. What the hell happened to you, girl? I ran my hand down her back. I expected her fur to feel dry, like it had been painted or dyed, but it felt just as soft as it always did. We'll figure this out. I swung my feet out of bed and walked towards the bathroom. But it's going to have to wait until I get home from work. Cleo decided to join me while I was sitting on the toilet peeing. Something about seeing me use the bathroom made her have to go. You better not stink it up in there, I warned her as she dug around in the litter box. I left the bathroom door open so she could leave when she was done. Then I got undressed and stepped into the shower. A short time later, while I was drying myself off, I heard a rustling sound come from the litter box. Are you still in there, Cleo? I figured she would have already finished her business and left. I was surprised to find the box empty, even though I could still hear the sound. That was when I noticed the box wasn't empty. There was something moving just beneath the surface of the litter. That's where the noise was coming from. I grabbed a scoop and used it to catch whatever it was. As the litter fell through the holes, I was confused by what was left behind. I was expecting a bug of some sort, but the thing that was revealed looked like cat poop. I know it couldn't be cat poop because cat poop wasn't green and didn't wiggle around like a worm. And yet I was sure that whatever had come from Cleo's behind. What the hell did you eat? I glanced out at the bedroom to see if I could see her, staring at the living turd with a mixture of horror and fascination as a bunch of tiny buds started to sprout up along the length of it. The buds then opened up to reveal a bunch of small pink flowers. The flowers smelled really nice, like a field full of daisies on a hot summer day. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I started to believe I really was in a vast meadow somewhere, surrounded by flowers as far as the eye could see. I wanted to stay there forever. It's a cat turd! The part of me that knew what was happening was not normal screamed in my mind. I opened my eyes to discover that I was holding a piece of poop less than an inch from my nose. "Oh!" I cried out and flung it into the toilet, then quickly flushed it. I took several deep breaths to clear the fog that had invaded my brain. I felt like I'd been drugged and was just coming out of a deep sleep. Once I was able to stand, I left the bathroom and checked the time. "Shit," I yelled when I realized I'd been sitting on the bathroom floor, smelling that piece of crap for almost 30 minutes. I got dressed as quickly as I could and then ran out of the door, hoping to make it to work on time. "You're going to the vet as soon as I get home," I said to Cleo as I left. While I was at work, I used one of my breaks to make an appointment with the veterinarian clinic. When they asked me what the appointment was for, I told them Cleo had some discoloration of her fur and green stools. I couldn't tell them the truth. I didn't think they'd take me seriously. When I got home and opened the door, Cleo was sitting in the foyer waiting for me as usual. I knelt down and started to pet her head, but drew my hand back when I encountered a large bump between her ears. "Really, Cleo?" I stood up and put my hands on my hips. I swear it felt like she was growing a freaking horn. This is getting ridiculous, I thought, while I pulled the cat carrier out of the closet. The only explanation I could come up was I was going crazy and having some wild hallucinations, or my cat was turning into some sort of fucked up fantasy creature. When Cleo saw the carrier and realized where she was going, she ran down the hall and into my room. This is the worst part of taking her to the vet. She never went into the carrier easily. There was always a fight, and it usually ended with me getting bit or scratched. I set the carrier on the top of the bed. Then I got down on my hands and knees to move all of the boxes out of the way. Once everything was clear and Cleo had nowhere left to hide, I reached out and grabbed her by the scruff of the neck. She growled and hissed and tried to scratch me with her back claws as I pulled her out from beneath the bed. I'd almost gotten her into the carrier without incident when she managed to hook one of her claws on the edge of the door. That allowed her to pull away from me and turn her head just enough to sink her canine teeth into the fleshy part of my palm. "You little freak!" I yelled at her, but I didn't let go. I used my free hand to grab her while I pulled the other one from her mouth. Once the hand was free, I tried to push her into the carrier. I almost had her inside, but there was a quick popping noise. Then she disappeared. One moment she was there in my grasp. The next she was gone. I looked at my empty hands. I was confused. I had no idea how Cleo got away or where she ran off to. I must have blinked when she got free. I looked everywhere for her. I checked under the bed, in the closet. I even checked in the shower. She was nowhere to be found. While I was in the bathroom, I took a few minutes to clean the bite on my palm and put a bandage on it. When I returned to my room, I sat down on the bed, hoping Cleo might come to me. That's when I heard her meow from the other side of the bedroom door. That's impossible. I walked over to the door and opened it, but there she was, sitting in the hallway looking up at me like nothing happened. I don't know how you got out here, but you're still going to the vet. She ran off down the hall, and I took a step towards her. I followed her through the house and found her waiting by the back door. I'm not letting you outside. I put my hand on the doorknob, wanting her to think I was going to let her out, so she would be distracted while I grabbed her again. Cleo meowed in anticipation as I pretended to turn the knob. I leaned down and grabbed her by the scruff. Gotcha, I said triumphantly. I had her. There was no way she should have been able to get away. But she did. Just like before, there was a quick popping noise. Then she was gone. I stood up and looked around to see what she could run off to. Then I saw her out of the corner of my eye. She was outside. She had somehow gotten through a closed door and was running through the yard towards the neighbor's house. I guess you aren't going to the vet. I called and canceled the appointment. I told them Cleo had gotten outside and I couldn't find her. I didn't know how to tell them she'd escaped by teleporting through a locked door and have them believe me. I didn't see Cleo for the rest of the night. In a way, I was sort of relieved. She was starting to freak me out. And I didn't really want to see what she would do next. Hypnotic flower poo and teleportation was enough for me. I didn't sleep well that night. I had this vivid dream that played out like a scene from a trippy Alice in Wonderland movie. In it, I was walking through the woods, but I was low to the ground like an animal. It was night, but I was still able to see clearly. Every once in a while, I would stop and look around. I was obviously searching for something. I kept moving until I came upon a clearing in the middle of a tight cluster of trees. I didn't enter the clearing because it was occupied by these strange little creatures flittering about. They were purple and had wings like dragonflies. They were obviously fairies, but they didn't look like the ones you see in cartoons. They looked like humanoid cross between insect and fish. They were seeming to have some sort of celebration. At least they were until I jumped into the clearing and started tearing them apart. The sudden violence of the dream and the high-pitched screams of the fairies as they were slaughtered jolted me awake. My heart was racing and I was covered in sweat. I could never fall back asleep, not fully. The images of the dream haunted me, making it hard for me to get comfortable. I tossed and turned for the rest of the night. I eventually had to get up because my hand started throbbing, the one Cleo had bitten. I knew cat bites could cause infections, but I wasn't really worried about that. Not at first. This wasn't the first time she's bit me. I've never had a problem with any other wounds, but she wasn't purple and pooping out flowers then. When I got to the bathroom, I removed the bandage so I could look at the puncture wounds. They were gone, completely healed, but something else had taken their place. Where the puncture wounds used to be was a large purple rash. When I first saw it, I thought it was a huge bruise, but when I touched it, it didn't hurt. Then I started to think about Cleo and how she went from having a calico coat to looking like the Cheshire Cat. The discoloration on my hands was the same shade of purple as her fur. Oh, fuck, I said out loud. Then to myself, I said, I've got what she's got. I started to panic. I felt like I couldn't breathe. I couldn't go to the doctor. What would I tell them? I think my cat ate a fairy and I've got some weird fey infection and might have given it to me when she bit me. They would think I was on drugs or crazy. I decided to take a shower while I was figuring out what to do. The hot steam and the steady pulse of water always helped me relax. As I stood there letting the water fall across my body, something felt off, more off than what I had already experienced. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, though. I just knew that I was overlooking something. It wasn't till I got out of the shower and stood in front of the mirror that I realized what it was. That can't be right, I thought. The towel rack seemed higher on the wall than it used to be. Then I looked around the bathroom. Everything seemed slightly higher than I remember. When I got out of bed earlier, I thought my clothes felt a little baggy, but I just had assumed it was from tossing and turning in them all night. As I looked at myself in the mirror, I began to realize it was because something else was happening to me. I wrapped the towel around my body, then went into the kitchen to get my tape measure out of the junk drawer. I put my finger on the tape to mark my height, then held it in front of my eyes so I could see how tall I was. "No freaking way!" I said when I saw the result. I didn't want to believe it, so I measured myself again. It was the same. I had shrunk 4 inches overnight. I needed to find Cleo. Maybe I could find someone who could help us if I could catch her. If I was going to do something, I needed to do it fast. I didn't think I had much time. The purple patch on my hand was spreading and had already reached my wrist. I hoped I wasn't shrinking as fast as I was changing color. I called my boss and told her I wasn't feeling well, and I was going to stay home. It was technically the truth. Then I spent the next hour doing research on fairies. By the time I was done, my arm was purple from my elbow down. I'm sure I probably shrank a little too, but I was too scared to measure myself. There was a lot of crap on the internet about fairies, and a lot of it was contradictory. But there was one thing they all agreed on. Fairies had a weakness to iron. I think the chain I used to lock up my mountain bike was made of iron. I went out into the garage and grabbed the chain off my bike. It might have been my mind playing tricks on me, but when I held the chain in my purple hand, I swear I started to feel lightheaded and a little weak in the knees. Hopefully it worked on Cleo. I put on a long-sleeve shirt which felt about 2 sizes too big and went out the back door. I was headed to the woods behind my house to look for Cleo. That was her favorite place to hang out. I didn't know where I was going. I was just walking, calling out for Cleo every so often. I did that for several minutes until I had a strong sense of déjà vu. The longer I walked, the stronger the feeling got. When I came upon a familiar cluster of trees, I realized I just walked the same path I did in my dream. I've walked through those woods dozens of times and have not once come across that circle of trees. I suppose it was possible that it was hidden from view somehow, and my current condition allowed me to see it. The secret glens were mentioned in a lot of fairy lore I read earlier. I stepped into the clearing, expecting to see fairy bodies everywhere, but I didn't see any. What I did see was Cleo, curled up under some exposed roots. As I approached her, I thought that she must have grown. She looked about 3 times as large as she did when she left the house. But she hadn't grown. She looked big to me because I was shrinking at an accelerated rate. There was no way I was going to be able to catch her now. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I probably wasn't safe where I was. I decided to leave when Cleo stretched her legs and extended her claws. They were about the size of daggers to me, and I didn't want to give her the chance to use them. I backed out of the clearing and quickly ran down the path towards the house. I glanced behind me to see if she was following me. I didn't see her. I made the mistake of thinking I was safe and forgot that Cleo didn't need to chase after me. She could teleport. When I turned my head back, she was standing in front of me. I was still much bigger than her, but she was armed a lot better than I was. All I had was the chain. It was gonna have to do. I lifted the sleeve of my baggy shirt as I let the links unravel from my hand and fall to the ground. Cleo lowered herself to the ground. I knew she was getting ready to pounce. I couldn't believe she was about to attack me. I figured it had something to do with the changes I was going through. I must smell like a fairy to her. Right before she was about to leap, I lashed out with the chain, striking her on the nose. She didn't like that. She hissed and tried to swat at it, but I had already pulled it back out of her reach. She started to growl and take slow steps toward me. I began swinging the chain in front of me like a lasso. When she didn't back down, I hit her with the chain again. Getting hit twice was enough for her. I guess she didn't like that I was fighting back, because she ran off into the woods. I took that opportunity and ran back into the house. As I ran through the foyer on my way to the bedroom, I noticed a piece of paper lying on the floor. That wasn't uncommon because solicitors would often push their flyers under my front door. This wasn't a flyer, though. It was a handwritten note. I stopped and picked it up. This is what the note said. Your purple cat attacked my dog this morning and bit my son while he was trying to pull them apart. I have notified animal control. What kind of person dyes a cat's fur purple? That is animal cruelty. I hope they take the poor thing away from you. You will be hearing from my lawyer. The cat had better had its rabies shots. It was signed Mary. She lived next door. I had more important things to worry about than empty threats from my neighbor. I would love it if animal control could catch Cleo. I would have called them myself if I thought they had a chance. I struggled for a moment, trying to decide whether or not I should warn Mary about what's going to happen to her dog and her son. I decided I had more important things to worry about, like what I was going to wear as I shrank, and how I was going to get around my house when I was 6 inches tall. I also needed to find a way to keep Cleo from getting back into the house. So quoth this raven. There is another Father Cook and Magister Alexander in the works. I have read the rough draft, and when he puts it up, I will finish it for you. But here's 2 stories from Ken to keep you entertained in the meantime. I would like to thank my Patreon supporters, Ermin Case, Darren and Jennifer Daw, and Callist Enoch. And all the rest of you, my darlings, I love and appreciate you so much. If you like this, please hit the little button to let me know. If you didn't, hit the little button to let me know. Leave a comment. I'm always glad to talk with you, my darlings. I'm open to suggestions and criticisms, critiques. If you have not subscribed, please do so and ring the little bell so you know when to come up and see me. And I will talk to you next time, my darlings. Farewell.